We had some amazing people, you know, and directors.
Virgil Vogel did a bunch of those too.
Virgil Vogel did it. Greg, will you? One day we were shooting and he goes, Greg, will you? Can you move a little bit out of the frame? We're trying to get the mountains in the shot. I said, I can do that, Virgil, but there's a fire right there you're asking me to move toward. He goes, yeah, but we need the mountains.
Hi, I'm Rob Word. Welcome to our Word on Westerns, and today we have a man who loves Westerns. You don't know him for Westerns, but this is a guy who found the rights to Red River and decided to remake it. And who's he going to get as the star? Big Jim Arness. That's right. My guest is the wonderful actor, Gregory Harrison. Welcome.
Hey, dude. Thanks, Rob.
Hi there.
He hasn't changed. That was quite a stunt to pull off at that time with Red River. It was Howard Hawks' classic with John Wayne. There's really nobody else to take that part of Dunson.
There really wasn't. It was a scary proposition. Remake. You know, when you remake something that seemed perfect, the whole idea of it was really frightening. But when we got the commitment from Jim Arness, it was like there was really only one person who could have, stepped into the shoes of John Wayne to play that role. And then we had Bruce Boxleitner to come in and play the other lead, and I took the opportunity as the producer to cast myself as Cherry Valance.
Yeah.
You know. Spin some guns.
And then you have like a competition, a mano a mano between you and Bruce.
I would lose that battle every time. No, but we collaborated really nicely. We had a great time.
Mm-hmm. In the original version, the scenes with your character Cherry Valance, he's so prominent at the beginning of the film, but then he sort of disappears, and it's, I think, because he was getting very friendly with Joanne Drew, who he later married, and it really upset Howard Hawks. But those scenes came back, and you were in those. So those are missing scenes from the original that we got to finally see.
Yeah, I mean, we had a little longer format for it, you know. I mean, we were able to add some stuff. It was one of the most fun jobs I've ever had, for many reasons. Being able to put Ray Walston in as the cookie, and we had such a great assortment of actors, and then getting some of the old class, Ty Hardin and God, I can't remember who we had.
Guy Madison, John Lupton,
people who I had grown up watching them do their Western, their Warner Brothers Westerns, for half-hour Westerns, and we got them all to come back and do this show. And then the highlight for me was being able to sit with Jim between shots out in Tucson, and we shot all over Tucson for about 4 or 5 weeks, and to sit with Jim and talk surfing. I'm a surfer. I started surfing at 9 years old over on Catalina Island, and Jim was famously one of the first Howley surfers to be accepted at Makaha, the west side of Oahu.
Wild
Serious,
side.
Big wave surfers and surfing, and all of the local Hawaiian boys accepted Jim, and so I knew he had. And plus, Rolf, his son, had been the U.S. surfing champ in like 1980, 1979, 80, and one of the best surfers that I've ever watched surf, and Jim had raised him to become this great surfer. So anyway, I had all this stuff to sit and talk to Jim about. And I'm still a surfer. I'm still crazy about it. And I'm still just so stoked that, using my surfing terms, I'm so stoked that I was able to spend that time with Jim Arness.
Did you ever surf with him at all?
Never surfed with him. No, he was beyond. When we did that, his knees were so bad that he couldn't even get up on the horse without a little help. Once he was up there, he looked great, and he did fantastic work. But no, he had bad knees, but he loved to talk about surfing still. He loved surfing as much as I did. So that was another one of the big highlights for me. And I that isn't why we cast him, because he was really the only one who could play John Wayne's, fill John Wayne's shoes.
It must have been a tough decision for him also to step into Duke's shoes, because Duke had been his mentor too.
Yeah. I don't know how tough that was, but I would assume that was nerve-wracking,
The cameos that you had in that film, Guy Madison, too. I remember getting a call from one of the producers on your show before it went into production, and they were saying, we're thinking about Guy Madison as one of the leads.
Right.
And we hear he's not in good health and he's missing a lung. And I said, we just shot with him in France for The Adventures of William Tell. And while he was missing one of his lungs, he is such a pro. He was just right there, but you just need to pace him. We had him playing an older guy, so it worked in his character. But I said, you'll be happy you used him. He's a consummate pro.
And he was.
And it was great to see him.
And he was. And he'd sit at his chair. He had a tank of oxygen with him, and he had the mask on until we'd say action. But then he showed up.
What was the elevation where you were?
It was lowlands. It was Tucson. It was the old western town in Tucson. And the environs around that area. But so it wasn't that high. Low desert.
Speaking of the John Wayne Howard Hawks film, do you have a John Wayne favorite film?
Oh, I have a lot of John Wayne films that I love.
Good man.
But I have a John Wayne. I had a relationship with John Wayne.
Well, we'd like to hear about that.
Tell you about my relationship with John Wayne. Having been born on Catalina Island, third generation, my grandfather started the glass bottom boats. My father ran them his whole life. And when I was a teenager there, going to Avalon High School, 31 kids I graduated with, 28 of them I went to kindergarten with. So it was like a small town. And John Wayne would come over with Pilar and his sons and bring at least a dozen Hollywood friends. And he would come in maybe 3 or 4 weekends a summer. And he would bring about a dozen of his guests, and he would get the shore boat, and they'd all come in. And I worked at a place. I had a job at 14. I got this job at Boys and Gulls Menswear. It was yachting clothes. So I'm 14 years old. I'm working in there, and one day I see the silhouette of John Wayne, the gate, and so he comes in with about a dozen people around him, and I'm the only one working as a clothing salesman. And he goes, hey kid, I want you to deck everybody out in their clothes, and I'm gonna go over to the Chi-Chi Club, and I'm gonna have a couple beers, and when I'll come back in a while, and I want them all to have new threads. And I said, yes, sir, Mr. Wayne, yes. And I sold everybody clothes. I got a commission. And everybody was happy with it. And he comes back about an hour later, and he's all right, thank you very much. And he leaves, and then about 2 weeks later, the boat comes back, and I see the silhouette outside, and he goes, is the kid here? And I'm right here, Mr. Wayne, and I come running up, and he goes, all right, kid, I'm heading over to the Chi-Chi again. Want you to deck them all out. And literally that for 3 years, I worked from 14 to 17, I worked there, and he would always come up, hey, is the kid here? And that's it, I was the kid.
Oh boy. Well, that's job security for you then, too. And so did you meet his kids and Patrick and stuff then, too?
They all came over.
Was there surfing on Catalina, or did you have to go someplace else?
On the other side of the island, about 13 miles outside of Avalon, There was a place called Ben Weston Beach and Shark Harbor, and we'd surf over there. I started surfing at 9, and I still surf. And I've done movies about surfing, and yeah, it's been a big part of my life.
How did you break into movies then?
In 1965, they shot a movie on my dad's boat, which was the winter boat, the Nautilus, which was the little glass-bottom boat. And the movie was called The Glass-Bottom Boat.
What, Doris Day? Was Doris Day in there?
Doris Day and Rod Taylor and Arthur Godfrey played my father.
Well, Paul Lynde must have been in that too.
I don't remember Paul being in it, but I was 15 and I had loved movies. I was in the little local theater in the high school. I had done some variety shows and done a couple of school plays, and I'd sat in that casino theater, you know, the big, beautiful casino theater, the first theater built for talkies.
Wow.
In the world. And I'd sat there in the front row of that and watched movies since I was like 4 years old and just thought, this is magic, this is magic. I don't know how they do this, but it's magic. It's like you can make people feel things, and it was like magicians up on the screen. I'm sitting on the boat, you know, they can't get rid of me. Like Route 66 and Morichuri, this Yul Brynner, Marlon Brando movie, all these things had shot on the island, and I'd try to get on the sets and watch what they were doing. They'd get rid of me. This is my dad's boat. They can't get rid of me. So I'm about 12 feet away from Rod and Doris doing this scene, and you know, and they're doing the dialogue, and all of a sudden Doris will go, God damn it, I blew it. Let's do it again. And I'm watching. You go, what? Doris Day swears. One, that would help. And then two, you can screw up and do it again. And then I watched, they'd do several takes, and then they'd go, okay, print, let's get another angle. And literally, it was my epiphany that day. I went, okay, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I can screw up until I get it right. I know how to do that. And that was the day I decided that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Literally, for real.
How did you get an agent?
Well, I ended up, you know, I graduated from high school over there, and then I got drafted and helicopter medic in the Army, 68 to 71, and then got out. I was almost 21 years old, and I had the GI Bill. So I went east to Hollywood. And Stell Harmon's Actors Workshop took the GI Bill, so I started studying there, and for about 4 or 5 years I pounded the pavement and learned my craft, and studied with Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg, and I had a window washing route on Santa Monica Boulevard, right all the way through the Swiss Alps down there. And I would wash windows between midnight and 3 a.m. so that I was free all day to study and work at the workshops and rehearse and learn scenes. I really put the blinders on and learned my craft. And so by the time, and then somebody came in 1975. They came to see. To look at class to see if there was somebody in there they could cast in this movie they wanted to make for $100,000. They, you know, for a year they were going to shoot on weekends, rent the equipment Friday night, bring it back Monday morning, and shoot straight through, and pay for one day's equipment rent. and so they said, you're good for this role. You want to do this movie with us? I said, sure, whatever. I didn't have a union. I mean, wasn't in the union. Didn't have an agent. I shot it for a year on weekends, and then Universal, Sid Sheinberg at Universal loved it. They bought it. They reshot half of it, so that got me in the union. Charles Champlin wrote a great article in the cover of the calendar section, and that got me an agent. And overnight, with about $100 in the bank, I was a movie star.
Wow. Nice.
So I sort of skipped all the bit parts and everything. But I spent 5 years learning my craft, and then I only went on good roles, you know, after that. And I finally nailed, what was it? I think the first one was I did Logan's Run, the series, Centennial. Talk about Westerns.
Let's talk about Centennial, because you were a Mennonite, I believe, in that.
Played a Mennonite.
Boy, that was a massive undertaking.
Massive. I aged from 22 to 78. Stephanie Zimbalist and I crossed America in a Conestoga wagon and started the town of Centennial. And
what a great role for you to have, too, in that.
it was like the central role around. There was probably 200 of the best actors in the world in that miniseries, 25-hour-long miniseries. I did 14 hours of it, and surrounded by some of the most talented, amazing actors you can imagine. It sort of cemented my reputation, at least, as someone who could make do if you cast me. I wasn't going to blow it.
It was amazing miniseries too. John Wilder, the creator and producer of that, he used to be an actor.
He's a great writer, great producer. Yeah. We had some amazing people, you know, and directors.
Virgil Vogel did a bunch of those too.
Virgil Vogel did it. Greg, will you? One day we were shooting, and he goes, Greg, will you? Can you move a little bit out of the frame? We're trying to get the mountains in the shot. I said, I can do that, Virgil, but there's a fire right there you're asking me to move toward. He goes, yeah, but we need the mountains. Finally, I ended up burning my feet in the fire. Yeah, that was Virgil. And Paul Krasny and a whole bunch of really good directors. And we shot all over Colorado and all over Texas, and it was amazing. It was amazing. That was where I had said when they cast me, they said, you ride, right? I said, oh yeah, I ride a horse, of course.
That's the stock answer. Well, did you ride? Yeah, I ride a surfboard.
Yeah, yeah. But I learned how to ride on that.
Who taught you how to ride? They had some great stunt people on that.
They had amazing people. No, I don't remember exactly who it was. Geez, we're talking 40-something years ago. But I did learn how to ride. I did have a fun experience riding a horse, though, on Centennial. You know, and there were a lot of Native Americans in the cast, and people playing Native Americans back when non-Native Americans could play Native Americans, and like Two Moons and Broken Thumb and all these names, and so I'm doing this biggest scene in the show where I'm on my horse, I'm looking at the plains, and Stephanie Zimbalist, my wife, is around the campfire, and a snake bites her on the neck, and somebody comes riding across to me, about a quarter mile across to me in this big wide shot, and tells me something, and I start galloping toward the fire, and just as that person I'm riding towards them. Their horse is supposed to come up on my left, and I'm on the right. They came up on my right. So my horse, which had gotten used to the idea in the rehearsal of having them come up on this side, slammed on the brakes. I hit the saddle horn so hard that I ended up...
Change your voice.
Yes, exactly. But we ended up having to still continue shooting for the rest of the day. But we had to check with all the women on the set, on location, to see who had a Kotex pad, because I was bleeding.
Ooh.
And yeah, a little TMI, no? And so I continued. We shot this scene. I had to come pick her up and weep, which was kind of getting easy to do at that point, and weep over her. And by the end of the day, about 14 hours of shooting, then they took me to the hospital where they put a catheter in me to stop the bleeding. Ooh. And I spent the night in the hospital, and the next morning, 6 a.m., I'm back in the van. We're going back out to set, and my honey wagon, which had Gregory Harrison on my door of my honey wagon, had been changed, and now it said, Broken Pee-Pee. And that was my name for the rest of the shoot.
Well, Broken Pee-Pee, have you been riding since then?
Yes, I have. Well, I went ahead and did Red River after that.
No, that's true.
So,
that's true.
Yeah. But I knew what to watch out for after that.
Well, before you go, I'd like to ask about Pernell Roberts and Trapper John, because that ran for 7 years. People can't believe it was such a long-running hit when you talk about it today.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, it was one of the top shows at the time.
It was. We inherited Carol Burnett's slot on Sunday nights at 10 o'clock. So the audience was, I attribute a lot of our success to that. The audience was used to tuning in. The major audience in America, back then with 3 networks, it was, if you got, 15 million, that was like, okay, that's a good night. Mm-hmm. Now 15 million is like the most popular show on television. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we got in Carol's audience, and the show had its charms, it was light. That was kind of just before St. Elsewhere changed medical shows to where the doctors weren't godlike anymore. Mm-hmm. They had their own issues and problems, which I always really liked, and I always pulled for that on our show, but nobody ever let me do it. But it was a really fun show. We had great guest stars. Ray Walston was on there several times. Red Buttons was on it. God, I directed Sylvia Sidney.
You directed 5 of those episodes too, I think.
Yeah.
So what was it like saying, I've got the power now, I want to direct some of these?
I've always tried to control the sets I'm on anyway, so it's just sort of, I to a fault, I'm more directorial than I am an actor. I always look at the big picture of things, and my challenge as an actor has always been to not think as a director when I'm in a scene with somebody. Don't gauge their performance while you're supposed to be living in your own character. So that's always been my challenge, and so it just felt right when I was directing.
Well, you can't control this show because we've run out of time.
All right. You get me talking, I'll waste an hour.
Let's have him back another time. This is so good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Donzo.